Hey, this is Alex Head, founder of Subtext Radio.
This is Subtext.
Please go ahead and click the like button and the subscribe button. It really helps us to reach new audiences and promote the artists that we work with. Hit like and hit subscribe. Welcome back to Subtext on Threads ZKU. So I'd like to introduce to you all, to the listener, to everyone here, the new Subtext format, Berlin Salon. The Salon, or café, holds an important place in the history of European cultural and political life. In the 19th century, for example, practitioners, philosophers, musicians would in fact give cafes or salons as their permanent postal addresses. So central were they to the discussions and discourse of the time. While in Berlin at the turn of the 18th century, Hannah Arendt observes the vibrant intersectionality of salons hosted by Jewish women that provided a space for those that did not share some of the prejudices of the wider society. This first episode of the Berlin Salon is really an opportunity to introduce some of the practitioners in Berlin, activists, artists, radio people, theatre people, that are interested in using the sound waves to communicate the particular struggles and concerns of their work, and with whom I'll be attempting to develop full-length and proper shows, as it were, full-length shows within the next year. So we're going to have a range of different types of content, and we've been very lucky to be joined in the studio today by Shanti Suki Osman, who is a prolific radio producer. Her work from the Hidden Histories to working with Collaboradio in Berlin and many other projects, including, Shanti, your current project, Future Sounds, which we hope to discuss in a minute. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
In the studio today, we also have Jana from Theatre X, who will be speaking to us about the current Camp Festiwalla and some of the history around the Theatre X and Festiwalla project over the past several years. Hello, Jana.
Hello.
Great to have you both in the studio. And we're also going to hear from the Spree Public campaign to keep the Rummelsberg Bay open in Lichtenberg, which has been described to some extent as the last remaining open commons in Berlin, insofar as that there are certain conditions which pertain to the Rummelsberg Bay which prevent it from being really regulated at all by the state. So that's quite an interesting site of discussion as well. So I'd like to begin with a short conversation with our first guest, Shanti. And Shanti, as I mentioned, you have a project at the moment called Future Sounds. I was one of the participants of your workshop at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt last year during the Radiophonic Spaces project, which involved your kind of sampling from the enormous radio archive which that show provided for the public to come and listen to. And from which I sort of took this impression of the relationship between sort of familiar sounds and sort of homeland, or perhaps Heimat has also been a strong theme of discourse in the past couple of years for sure in Berlin. And I wanted to ask you if perhaps the Future Sound project in some way seeks to answer questions around what one could hear and what one could not hear within that archive at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the Future Sounds project and some of the other things which maybe join the dots between some of what you're doing in sound.
That's a really great question. I like the way you've already joined a few dots between the stuff I do. So the Future Sounds project is part of the Akademie der Autodidakten at Bauhaus Naunenstraße, and I've had the great pleasure of working with a small group of black women and women of colour, and since March, and together we spent the first couple, just really quickly about the project, we spent the first couple of months really exploring different forms of sound art. I was literally introducing them to artists, which was really beautiful actually, and then exploring different recording techniques, so field recording, other different ways of creating sound, And yes, so we've come to our point where we had our premiere last night, and it was, excuse me, it consisted of, let's say, 5 sound pieces, which were then sort of played in the room, literally played in the room. And obviously it's in a theatre, so this idea of a sound performance being played in a theatre meant there's some visual elements and I'm not sure how much to give away really. Basically the audience sits in the middle and everything happens all around it. But to link to your question, I think it's really, really relevant. So Future Sounds is basically that. It's the future sounds of young women of colour, young black women, marginalised bodies who aren't listened to. And for me, it was this idea of, okay, in order to get at these future sounds, in order to get at these imagined cities of these young women who otherwise don't have the space or need to fight for the space, first of all, people need to listen. So it's sort of this, it's not like a linear process, like it has to sort of happen at the same time. And one of the things that we were doing a lot of in the past few months, and even one of the kind of motivation speeches I gave to them last night was about like, take your space. This is your space. Be loud, make noise. So that's sort of part of it. And exactly, I think it was a great pleasure to do the workshop series at Haus der Kultur und der Welt. And it was really interesting when diving in the material, because it was quite difficult to find voices, I thought, that were marginalised. And I think that is the result of lots of things, lots of structural things that I think we know about. Who is being listened to, first of all? Who is loud enough? Who's sitting at the best seat at the table? Who has access to funding, which I think your previous guest also at the end, I know it was a bit of a joke, but it's a serious question. Like, okay, if someone gives me funding, I can carry on. Who has access to this funding? Who has access to the knowledge of how to talk to the people to get the funding? Who has a seat at the table, basically? So, of course, in this vast archive of radio material, there was a lot of exciting stuff, and I had to spend a lot of hours trying to fish through, to look through, to find these marginalised voices. And I think that's something that I do in the radio show Hidden Stories, which was also an eye-opener for me as well. I was discovering lots of different like hidden stories, hidden histories, like you said. But then I would find stuff that was about, for example, the first female ex-slave in Brazil to become a politician, and that was sometime in the 1800s. And this woman was also a teacher as well. And then I'd find like lovely instances like this. And then after a while, I thought, but hang on a minute, are these my stories to tell? So it was quite an interesting experience for me, trying to develop a platform that was creating space for these stories, but not giving them my voice, so to speak. Sorry, it's one last thing. And then the nice thing about Future Sounds, just to come back to it, is it's been a really beautiful experience of kind of sharing my ideas with these young artists, these young women, these young activists. I mean, some of the things that they do, sometimes I was really impressed. It's like, wow, you're more on the front line than I am, which is fine. They're like 10 years younger, so they maybe have a bit more energy. And it's been an absolute pleasure and honour moving things out the way and creating space for them, for their voices. was quite good, actually. It was a bit
Thank you.
spontaneous, but thanks for the question.
No. So many things to digest and to dwell on within all of that, which I think is part and parcel of working with kind of large archives, working with lots of different types of, let's say, speaker, and then kind of going through this process of delivering what are inevitably edits to some extent, even like through the decisions that you have to make about who you work with and where you work and everything. You're always involved in its reproduction, let's say. But that kind of goal of keeping it in a space that has a kind of like hands-off approach, or has a kind of like you kind of able to step back in to the extent that it's possible, I think highlights maybe like part of the skills that one needs to work with those types of subjects and those types of players and activists, like you say, and sort of agents within this big, incredibly complex world, which involves people's personal lives, people's own histories, family histories, their public activism, and their kind of intellectual digesting and processing of all of that at the same time. I think what I'd like to do now is ask Jana as well about some of the, let's say, some of the context, some of the goals of the Festiwalla project, which I've kind of known on and off also from Haus der Kultur und der Welt. So today we do a big like Haus der Kultur und der Welt, like promotional. We hopefully get some funding from them, you know. So yeah, I mean, I guess there's also this idea of like who is heard, and who has the power to be heard within Festiwalla as well. So how did it all start, the Festiwalla project, or the festival, really?
Well, the Festiwalla project is, as you mentioned, a festival. We mixed together a lot of different arts and subcultures in this festival, and it started actually as a project with youth and youngsters coming to our office. At that point it was still called the Jugendtheaterbüro, and they created a space there for them to actually get their own voices to be heard, to put their topics on stage. And normally those people that are most definitely marginalized, they don't really have the chance to get their stories to be told, or to tell their own stories on a stage with a bigger audience. And you know, theater, it's always viewed as this high level culture, which is not accessible for people from different social backgrounds. And yeah, we wanted to change that. We wanted to show that actually everyone can do arts and can express themselves. And it was a 3-year project which like developed into this festival in the end. We called it Festiwalla, because Festi for the festival part, and Walla as this space where everyone can express themselves. And we actually launched it 2011 at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt, and we had a little bit of a struggle with the Haus der Kultur und der Welt, because we wanted to do everything ourselves. We wanted to like do things the way we wanted to do, and we had a little bit of a clash with this old institution, which was already having its own ways, sometimes also rusty ways of doing things. But we wanted our people to like do everything, from the lights, the costumes, the sets, like also being on stage, choosing the topics, and they weren't really clear about what was happening there. So yeah, we had to fight our way in, and we did this for 4 years at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt, and by the end they were like really happy to always having us back, and they really wanted us back all the time. And after that we had a break in the Haus der Kultur und der Welt. They also renovated a lot of for a longer time, and we had 2016 a festival then at the Uferfabrik in Tempelhof, which is a really great space for having a festival, especially a youth culture festival. And right now at the Theatre X, at our own home base, we're having a smaller camp, a Berlin-wide camp with workshops and creating a network of organizations of resistance in Berlin, because we feel like the right-wing shift in Europe needs like something to be stand up against. Yeah, that's our concept there.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and it feels as though am I right in thinking that this year's Festiwalla is particularly kind of international as well?
It is indeed. Right now, like I said, we have this 3 days event. It's a little bit smaller, and it's the kickoff event for our next camp in October. Like it's on the second weekend of October, and there we have 8 groups from all across Europe and also from Palestine. One group which are coming to Berlin, and we're gonna have a 5-day festival of lots of workshops talking about resistance, talking about why is this right-wing shift happening, what can we do against it, how can we show solidarity, how can we create a network of solidarity, and it's going to be really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to it a lot because this is the first time we have Festiwalla on such an international context, and that's, for me, that's really amazing to see that we develop in this way.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess I would like to ask you maybe both. Theatre X, aka Jugendtheaterbüro Berlin, is entering, or it's now in its 10th year of operation, which is like a little celebration. I think that's fantastic. But during that time, I guess I wanted to kind of frame a question about what kind of spaces exist and are kind of available for the two of you as practitioners within the kind of more mainstream media, within either print or radio or television, and has that sort of changed over the last 10 years for Theatre X, and I guess also equally long amount of time in a sense, Shanti, for your own practice. What is the kind of public reception of the sorts of things which you're putting out within, let's say, the more mainstream circles?
I would say the reception is kind of controversial because we are doing political work, and political work is always received controversial, and we don't do the mainstream mid-right-wing views. We do a lot of critical views, and we do put politics and our criticism on stage. And I think the media coverage is on and off. It's like sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. It really depends on the own work we are doing also with the media. A lot of things are going on social media right now, and that's actually because we want to reach out younger people, and I'm not sure if younger people are still using like the old media, like not old, but like the media that is used like in general. Mm-hmm. And so we're up for monitoring that a little bit more, and also I think like networks of resistance can be formed on social media a little bit better than just by buying a left-wing newspaper.
Wow, super interesting, if I can say as well, all the stuff you've been saying. I think to answer that question, for myself, I think I might take it in a slightly different direction. So talking about me personally, right now, I feel I'm being listened to. I have the privilege of being able to, hopefully converse intellectually in German and English, and I have access to sort of things like conferences and things on this academic level where there's this huge surge in not just sound art studies but in education, like arts education, but also in lots of other fields where it's very important to deal with this question, who is being listened to, and in lots of different disciplines. So I'm feeling super privileged at being invited to such things, and I'm very aware of that and trying very hard to make sure that within these settings I can still position myself with agency, and I can still position myself, hopefully, with not being tokenized too much. Because here comes the other sort of angle of, just to go back to the core of your question, like what spaces are available. I think the spaces that are available are more spaces, maybe more theatres, maybe more institutions want to open up to these voices. the question is, what role do we then play in these institutions? Something like Ballhaus, something like Theatre X, aka Jugendtheaterbüro, and lots of other places, Werkstatt der Kulturen. Trying to think off the top of my head, there's these places that still allow for this autonomy of the marginalized voice to come through as, let's say, quote unquote, authentic as it possibly can. The agents, the actors involved are people of color, people from other marginalized groups. Great. As soon as things start to change and we as experts, let's say, enter into these other institutes, this is where another level of resistance comes into play. Thinking about us as the sort of facilitators of these younger activists and younger artists, we have to be really careful to make sure that we're still negotiating conditions that support us, negotiating conditions, for example, what you said, where you can still bring your own people in to do costume, to do sound, to do light, and everyone still is owning the project. And I can, when you were describing that, I really felt for you and the group, and I was thinking, oh wow. But just the second half of my question, what spaces are available for these, not just for me or for Jana, but for these young people that we're working with? Those spaces are also increasing because there is more knowledge out there. But sometimes, you know, I do think we have to be really careful about the intention behind it. Sounds super cynical, but I think it's, I feel really protective. Maybe this is after having this very acute experience of working with this small group for a long period of time, but also in other examples, if I see a group, you know, if I want young women of colour to feel protected when they go to spaces, when they go to theatre workshops or other events that are offered for them. It's like what you said, it's not just like who is allowed to be heard, but like who is making the space and for what reason, I suppose. So yeah. Lots of like things tangled up there. It's brilliant. It's wonderful that we're talking about the topics that are important to us. It's really wonderful, but let's not get lazy. Like it's not like we've done our work. We haven't done our work yet. Yeah. It's not finished.
The show still comes to an end and everyone goes home and life continues. And yeah, those prejudices are still met on a day-to-day basis often for lots of people. Okay, well, I think this has been a really fascinating discussion so far, and like I say, this is the first of the Berlin Salon, so I really hope that you'll both join us in further debate in the future. Maybe there are lots of other dimensions to this. I would like to focus a little bit now on this kind of particular geographical situation in the Rummelsberg Bay over in Lichtenberg. I think that the kind of spatial intensity of Berlin inevitably sets a backdrop to the conflicts and conditions that we're discussing. I don't want to get too sort of abstract and politically, economically involved in that kind of discussion now, but I think it's interesting to see another type of more physical encroachment upon what could be described as a free space or a kind of space for experimentation, which isn't just the discourse and the knowledge production, but is actually the physical space in and of itself. So this is an extract from an interview that I did with Emmanuel et Haute de Poix, who is, let's say, activist and experimental kind of thinker of a kind, whom actually was the first person I lived with in Berlin sort of 10 years ago. So really nice kind of like recapping with him. And this is before he built his floating home on the Rummelsberg Bay earlier this year. So I'm just going to jump into that conversation with him now.
The reason why there's all these boats here is because this is an anchorage place and you have the right to anchor, and unless something is changed to this rule, the cops cannot say anything about that, you know. And actually here is very interesting because it's like a kind of it's the result of like a lot of political hypocrisy, this situation, because as being part of the Spree, it's part of the maritime ways, and these are always under the regulation of the federal state and not of the city. and that's the reason why the city, who eventually would have most interest on changing the situation here, cannot do anything about it. And the federal state says, okay, you want to make new laws for the bay, alright, but then you have to take the responsibility of the bay. And the thing is, the bay is totally contaminated by industry of the beginning of the 20th century, with like heavy metals and very toxic stuff. And basically the one who has the responsibility of the bay has also the responsibility of like trying to clean it, and these costs are so beyond imagination what it would mean to like restore this area, that obviously the city has no interest of taking the responsibility over the bay. And from that is this situation. And so all the boats that are here, they're like profiting from this like lack of interest or lack of political ambition to regulate this space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that's kind of like, it's the case with a lot of wasteland spaces, but somehow not quite enough to protect them forever, but for long periods of time. And this is the last instance, maybe you can say one of the last instances in Berlin where that condition still produces echo, which is a complete opposite of what it was before in terms of industrial use and everything like that. But it's somehow this Gegenteil, like this opposite effect, historical irony. And this is like, we're here at the Rummelsberg. I mean, we're looking at this island, or it's more of a peninsula, really.
This part is a peninsula, yeah.
And this is, I mean, there's this one old building still left here. Is it industrial then, this peninsula, in the past?
No, I guess so, but I don't quite know like exactly. Now it's totally residential. Stralauer Halbinsel. And actually at the end of the peninsula it's a very nice spot, because you have kind of water all around. But I'm not quite sure whether the industry was rather on that side, because there's still like, if you go a bit out of the bay, there's on this side, on the north side, there's still the Zementwerk, like remains of this industrial production area. But so I guess probably there was a lot of industry here, but I don't know exactly.
I mean, I guess the waterways are like major transport, in the 19th century and the 18th century and further back, because you don't have, I don't know when you get like the first really efficient railway lines for transporting goods. I think a lot of it is on water for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the reason why you can go pretty much everywhere by waterways, because where the connection is not naturally given, man created it because of commerce, because of transport of goods. So it's really funny in the end, because also, I mean, now the water heats up again, but like a month ago, I guess because of the heat, there was like an extreme development of this kind of algae that is like neon green. And it was one Sunday I came here, it was like so extreme in certain parts, like you had the impression of like really a totally dystopian like sci-fi movie of like cruising on a lake of acid or something like this, like really like neon green. But it was a good metaphor for what this is, because this is like the people that live here, they call it the Giftloch, like the poison hole. And this is also quite dystopian, no? That people live on the poison
living
hole.
on gift, sure.
But I guess that's the reason why I'm here, also because of what you said before. It's like it's kind of one of the last free spaces in this city, and likewise, water is one of the last free spaces on the planet. It's the same here.
Yeah, I think it's a really poignant observation, and it's sort of... I mean, what's funny about this place is that it's so beautiful, it's so scenic, but it seems so kind of unknown as well. I mean, you have, of course, like, the people who use the water, they use the bay itself, but it's still kind of... It's just above Treptower Park, but also Treptower Park is a kind of weird barrier, you know, like it creates a kind of... I don't know, maybe...
Yeah, and the Ostkreuz also, I think, like, actually, as soon as you pass Ostkreuz, you're in the hip Friedrichshain, but as soon as you come on this side, you're, like, already in Lichtenberg, like, former industrial zone. That is actually now developing. I mean, in a couple of years, it's gonna be... Lichtenberg is gonna be a whole different story, but it's true that it's, like, it's kind of remote, but not really. I mean, we are still by the Ring, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it took me 30 minutes to get here.
Yeah, but it's just on the edge, you know, on the other side, kind of.
Yeah, and it's that combination of factors. It's like it's being like ex-industrial, being in a former area, like a poor area, and not really like on the collective imagination, or certainly not in the imagination of people who are not from Berlin. You know, when you come to Berlin, you don't think I'm going to go to Lichtenberg, or like, you know,
Exactly.
maybe nowadays you find your Airbnb there, but
Or for some clubbing, I guess.
yeah, and it's because they've been building Ostkreuz station for as long as I can remember, like more than 10 years is the first time I was here. That it just feels like it's not really finished yet, so we'll just let them finish, and then maybe there'll be something there afterwards. But it's good for this as well. It keeps the kind of like synthetic barrier in place.
Yeah, I have no idea how long it's going to last, actually, because there's still some political, like, how would you say, some political drive to try to change the situation of the bay, like to unpollute it, and also to do something against the squatters, and you don't know, but that's also why I want to get on the water as fast as I can, because I'm not sure how long it is still going to be possible.
Yeah, and so like getting on the water in terms of like living in the bay, like that's also the product of intensification, a lot more pressure on the real estate in Berlin. You know, it's not just the wasteland spaces; it's of course the rents going up. And,
of course, yes.
And that all happened very quickly, it seemed. Because I mean, I haven't seen you for like 6 months, but a lot of things have happened in that time. No?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I grew up in the city and I started to feel a bit like a economical refugee in my own city somehow. Like, obviously there's still ways to live very cheap, but like the access, how easy it used to be, is totally different within 6 years since we created the last flat where I was living, and now I left. Changed so much.
And that was up by Tempelhof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what you think of, you know, there's this, I have to think what it's like, is it Berlin Schwimmbad, or no, it has a particular name. I will think of the name, but there's a project from some people that I know to turn a part of the Spree into like a swimming area. I'm sure you've heard of this. They've been doing research for years and years to
I heard about several, like about this topic, about several different stories. I heard also that they want to try to find ways to clear up the water, so to create like bathing opportunities around the canal. I mean, I heard that it's kind of a fashion now, starting in like the Stadtentwicklung of the city. And about the Spree, yeah, I'm not sure. Actually, I heard that there is like one thing planned on the bay here is like a gigantic aqualand.
Yeah.
From some project from some millionaire, I don't know, not sure where from again, but yeah, they plan to do this. So I think it's a combination of like aquarium kind of thing and water world, like a fun park, something like that. So it might be in connection with that. I'm not sure.
No, I think it's. I have heard of things like that before. There was like a big harbour development that was going to happen over by the Kopernika wasteland. That was like one of their big motif plans, was to do like a harbour side development offices and use that to then clean the water as well. Like that was also part of their plan. But
the water of the Spree.
Yeah. But the project that Kai, his name is Kai, is involved in is I think it's called like Berliner Schwimmbad. I'm pretty sure that's the name of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it's to clean just a particular piece of the Spree, and then so like the state is investing in this. It's costing them like, I don't know, it's ridiculous. It's something like €20,000 a week to because they're constantly testing the water. So they have a barge in the Spree, I guess, over by kind of near to like Alexanderplatz, but then around the back is this kind of particular housing area. It's near to Stadtmuseum kind of thing.
Okay.
It's like there.
But how do they want to get the water clean on a certain slot of the Spree? I don't get it. I mean, it's flowing water. How could they?
Yeah, it's basically putting up, like they want to use plants for one thing.
Okay.
Which like.
Salut.
Welcome back to Berlin Salon. As you can hear, the bar is open behind us, and people have started to enjoy their pipe and a little cafe. Maybe take some of the literature in the corner, make yourself feel comfortable. And the next piece which I will play is a short extract from a longer interview with the Berlin artist Andreas Siekmann, who is also staying near to the Lichtenberg area, so he's sort of relatively close to the Rummelsberg Bay, so staying in that sort of part of Berlin. I interviewed him about his work in the Münster Sculpturen project in 2001, which I actually saw on a 2007, on a trip to the Münster Sculpturen project, or pilgrimage. If you don't know it, it happens every 10 years. It's a very interesting public art festival, which I will go into further detail about in a later show, which I'm producing with him and Emmanuel Horte-Despois. And so the trickle-down piece was a piece that Andreas made in response to this sort of conservative economic policy of investing in sort of corporate management of public assets, and the sort of the famous political idea that the money from that part of the economy will sort of trickle down to the poorer aspects of the poorer parts of society. So to just quickly sort of explain the work before letting Andreas describe it and the reasons that he made it himself, this involved taking the kind of mascots for different German cities. So, for example, in Berlin we have the bear, this sort of plastic, single shape, single form eyesore that occurs pretty much every 5 seconds in the city. In other cities it's the cow, and then there are all kinds of different models and mannequins that have been produced to give the city a sort of identity, I suppose, or reflect the identity in a sort of easily consumable way. And he was destroying those by crushing them to pieces and then exhibiting those pieces in Münsterskulpturen project.
Kind of city, it looks like a city, has function like a city, but it's not any longer in the hand of a city, and you don't see it because it has the same. And therefore, I want to work with this kind of how it's possible. Sorry for this.
No. I didn't put the alarm on that time because I thought it was just really interesting. But maybe I will ask you for more clarity on that specific process, because I think that's one thing that's can be really great, is to get some fleshy details of the economic theory. And when you say that you cannot you don't have value in a market as a debtor, as someone with debt, and you transform that into rent, you're talking about particularly the city itself? The city is in debt, and so it rents out its services and its labor relations as well. How does that all what does that look like, or how could that be described in more detail?
It's like also what happens in Berlin, because in Berlin was is a country and a city in its own. It's a country, Berlin. So this city has a debt of 65 billion euros. So it's one city has debt like 3 or 4 countries in Africa. So like these kind of things. And how it's possible to survive, because that is only possible if you bring and to keep your liquidity, because you have therefore contracts, and I work also in this kind of research on it. It's called Basel 1, 2, 3. Now we have Basel 3, and there are rules, and they make rules worldwide on the banks that if you want any money and to keep it, because money is nothing else than debt, at least. So, and therefore, if you want to invest something, you need money, and it's credit money, but it's for the investor. They have not the money. They create the money with this kind of debt, and they can only create it with the kind of security or with the kind of perspective that is guaranteed by the state or by the commune itself. So at least these kind of rents are more expensive than the city planned it by your own. But so they broke up all the departments that before worked for the city, throw them out, reduced the cost, and when you give it to a private company and you have to rent it. And at least if you follow the lines of 30 years, they paid more than 1/3 part more than they do it by your own. So at least it's a kind of sold out.
It's
and that is a dynamic, and this dynamic goes and goes and goes, and you will find more and more. Now in Berlin, but you follow it, now they're thinking about privatization of schools.
Right.
Also that the building are complete constructed by private, and so all this kind of processes is not in their Schublade. What is in English?
Drawer.
Huh?
The drawer.
The drawer. They have
drawer,
so many ideas, you can't believe it.
Yeah.
What is possible, how to make money with the public. At least it's the kind of, and that is really a kind of difficult contradiction. The neoliberal are talking about against the state, but at least they need to complete the state as a guarantee for their business, and so they are in competition to the social money. So at least they want the social money, because they think we are social, because when we have the money, we find some few jobs for the poor. So that is this kind of battlefield. So that is this aggressivity. And I think there's no path. I think there's no perspective. I think that is the most dystopian thing, what I see. You can see do-it-yourself city, you have this creative class thing, but it's only based on this kind of, on these economic conditions, but you cannot change these conditions. I think that was, and so I keep it on this so-called negative line or on the critic line, and not to say, oh, that is my alternative, I'm now an initiative, and we play and we make a creative city, and like this, and because it's immediately part of the marketing, like this, or the branding cities. Yeah. And so that was why I do it in this kind of languages.
Okay, welcome back into the studio. I would like to sample a very short passage from Hannah Arendt's description of salons in Berlin from the beginning of the 19th century. I've been reading The Origins of Totalitarianism while staying with family in the United Kingdom for a month, and I think it's had already a sort of satisfyingly subtle but definable influence on the way in which I'm approaching these shows and the way in which I'm approaching the ideas for the rest of the year. So I would like to give a little bit of context to the concept of the Salon and then continue to discuss a little bit with my two guests today, Shanti and Jana. And live in the true spirit of radio, we are also going to have a 2-minute premiere recording from Shanti's opening show of Future Sounds last night. So that's all going to be packed in the next 13 minutes. So stay tuned, as they say. The charm of the early Berlin salons was that nothing really mattered but personality and the uniqueness of character, talent and expression. Such uniqueness, which alone made possible an almost unbounded communication and unrestricted intimacy, could be replaced neither by rank, money, success nor literary fame. The brief encounter of true personalities, which joined a Holotaurian prince, Louise Ferdinand, to the banker Abraham Mendelssohn, or a political publicist and diplomat, Friedrich Gentz, to Friedrich Schengel, a writer of the then ultramodern Romantic school. These were a few of the more famous visitors to Rahel's garret, and came to an end in 1806 when, according to their hostess, this unique meeting place foundered like a ship containing the highest enjoyment of life. Along with the aristocrats, the Romantic intellectuals became anti-Semitic, and although this by no means meant that either group gave up all its Jewish friends, the innocence and splendor were gone. So Arendt details the stark consequences of emancipation for the Jewish people in Prussia after that time, and the kind of taking away of a special status which had afforded some Jewish bankers and other members of the kind of would-be aristocracy a certain status. And so during that kind of emancipation, what was brought on from the loss of the Napoleonic Wars by Prussia to Napoleon, this kind of the existence of the Jewish status became much more precarious. There was a certain amount of wealth and status that was no longer really was no longer really understood. So as it were, the purpose of the roles which they had previously played was no longer seemed to stand up in society. And so they were somehow expected to fit in and be normalized, at the same time still had this kind of awkward transitional role, or this awkward transitional position within society. So this kind of precarity, this kind of loss of status, I guess, is something which my guests have been sort of discussing to a greater or lesser extent in some of the work that they've been doing today. I wonder if there is a way in which the kind of increasing, progression, let's say, the political progression of the far right of the AfD in Germany is able to sort of play with the idea of like status, official status, German status, non-German status, and how that becomes manifest within some of the work, for example, with the Hakawatis within the Theatre X project. So perhaps you, Jana, if you'd be interested and sort of in a place to discuss perhaps how the Hakawatis are operating within Theatre X and what that feels like in the current political context of Germany.
Well, the Hakawatis is a group in Theatre X made of refugee artists and non-refugee artists. And it's a self-organized group, so they also do everything themselves. They come up with their own ideas, what they want to talk about. They come up with their own costumes. They come up with their own plays and speeches, and they have their own unique style. Hakawati means storytellers, so mainly we do a lot of theater, but they have their own style of theater as a storytelling theater. So that's a little bit different, and it, of course, picks up like old, unique storytelling cultures from the Middle Eastern parts. And basically what they do is, or they started off as using our space. We gave our space to them as a unique group, and they grew into the context of Theatre X. So they are now a part of Theatre X, and we're really proud of having them there. And they play like a very, very important role for us battling the whole right-wing shift of the, in the German context, also in the European context, because they are the most vulnerable people within the Theatre X. So, they all have different statuses. Some are like asylum seekers. Some might be even illegal in Germany here. Some have a more secure status, but they all have like they share like common stories of migration, of fleeing wars or other. Or fleeing for other reasons, and they're really like they're sharing the stories of us in an approachable way, showing that no, we're not all the same. We are not a unique group of evil people that come here and want to take away things from other people. We are marginalized people, and all we want to do is living alive like everybody else, living in peace, living in freedom. And I think that's very important to show those people and share those stories, as long as they want it, in the way they want it, of course. And that's really
I mean, having also worked with the Hakawatis on the Heimat deiner Schnauze last year, I think that spirit of self-organization and taking on the mechanics of reproduction, mechanics of cultural production, definitely runs through the entire of the Theatre X and all the way through, of course, within the Hakawatis as well. I think it's important as well to look at the kind of, let's say, the manner and the means in which we reproduce our culture and the arguments and the discourses which we are involved with themselves. And so I wanted to just quickly transition to a last question for you, Shanti, which hopefully gives us the sort of 2 or 3 minutes we need to air your thing. But the researcher and broadcaster Sophie Dyer in London described radio last year as operating between sort of the man-made and the cosmic, and acting as a sort of a coded entity which can serve to ramp up and sort of broadcast and transmit a certain sort of social concern or social determinant, is the language that she used. But I wonder, and this is slightly kind of like a philosophical question perhaps, but I wonder if the transition from broadcast radio to e-radio, which is broadly what I've been involved with actually, somehow shifts that. Like, has it changed? What's the shift between sort of broadcasting on the airwaves to broadcasting on the internet? Is there some magic that's lost there? Is there something that's less about kind of the station you're on, but rather the discourse you're involved with, do you think?
I think it's a really great question, and I think I can imagine even some of my radio colleagues would have very different ideas and very different answers to this. I think for me, just to answer quickly, for me there is no magic lost. Maybe because I don't sort of have this mystical kind of like love for the old radio. I love stories and I love communication, and I think right now with the topics I'm working on with and the people I'm working with, and it's about accessibility, and really simply I think e-radio, I mean like online streaming, we can say this makes things more accessible. From, you know, internet is okay, not everybody has internet, but a lot of people have it, so it's easier to get to. And also I think that just in terms of technology and in terms of like future visions and in terms of access to that, I think as soon as you have e-radio, you have a laptop or a device or a phone or a tablet. And I think for me then comes in all these like other notions of like women in technology and using it as using technology as a way to also reclaim space. So I'm not sure that I would word it in exactly the same way as that, and I definitely wouldn't come up with this dichotomy of like, it's not quite a dichotomy, like this spectrum of man-made one side and cosmic the other, because a lot of this idea of like the sonic cyberfeminisms comes from this combination of using these tools, you know, like using these tools, the mixer, the microphone, the Zoom recorder, the tool of recording as a process to claim space. So, I mean, you ask a philosophical question, so I give you a bit of a vague answer, but basically the magic is not lost. I think it just creates new paths for exploration and storytelling.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. Thank you to Tim Lang for your wonderful instrumentals that we've been enjoying for this program as well. We're going to finish off with a short clip from Shanti's Future Sounds, which premiered last night. I'm very excited to have that for you. In closing, I would, rather than make some big sort of a conclusion, I would just like to invite everyone to come back to the next Berlin Salon to look out for those programs. Thank you to everyone that's been involved in putting together this broadcast, and thank you to ZKU and to Threads, of course. Just on a personal note, if you're not listening to the Bad Gays podcast on Apple, what are you actually listening to? So check it out. The final clip then from Shanti Suki. Thank you once again, and see you next time.
Come on, don't hide.
Heute ist ein schöner Tag. Du fühlst dich glücklich und heiter. So hast du dich schon ewig nicht mehr gefühlt. Dich überkommt ein Drang. Der Drang zu tanzen. Frei tanzen.
Get a grip on female disobedience.
I'm going to remember.
Strategies for coping with overcoming. I repeat the mantras, inscribe them on my body. I approve of myself. Mixed beings, molecules, machines. Boundaries dissolve. No border, no nation.
Remember. Remember again. Remember the names. I changed my city from one big city to another big city.
Layers, stones,
but this new
soils,
one
and
was far, far away in the north. Everything is different about this new city. But still, in every corner of this city, the story, rumor, myth is the same.
Empowerment and self-care is dogma.
What do you need to love yourself?
Versuche dich zu entspannen und dich in diesen Ort hineinzuversetzen. Versuche, deinen kompletten Körper zu entspannen. Und einatmen und wieder ausatmen. Und einatmen und wieder ausatmen.
Ich beschütze dich nur.
Ohne Hintergedanken, im Hier und Jetzt.
I walk the path where I can see my own footprints. Have I walked this path already?
I'm secretly waiting for you to realize that you are perfect as you are.
I'll remember again. I know I will. because now I'm walking a new path. I know that I might end up finding my own footprints again, which means that I'll forget again, but I continue walking.
Wie fühlst du dich jetzt?
I approve of myself.
I continue walking.
Come on, don't